I've spent around 20 years in HR across public and private and third sectors. But all of that pales into insignificance the last week, as I have been a vanguard business for the Keep Britain Working Group, and as such, attended the CBI Roundtable event in London and also aired on the BBC Radio 4 Today show.
Hello everyone, I'm Joe Perry and welcome back to Across the Virtual Table, our podcast where we have real conversations about building capability, confidence and the gritty reality of ER and HR in the modern workplace. Today, we're going to be unpacking the Keep Britain Working Review, the areas of focus from a number of different perspectives, the Employment Rights Bill, conflict and people skills, all through the lens of what it means for an SME. I am very pleased to say that with me again is Deb Rees from LSN Diffusion, who will be helping us to think about how to prepare without panic. Now, at time of recording, the bill has not yet passed. We aimed to coincide this with the bill becoming an act, but unfortunately, parliamentary ping pong has kept us on our toes. However, the good news is that it isn't going to stop us looking at the implications, even if some of the exact detail does change, but more on that later. But before we get started, Deb, what a week you've had. Can you talk us through what you've been up to?
Hi, Joe. It's great to be back. So as you said, I'm Deb Rees, HR Manager at LSN Diffusion, a South Wales manufacturer producing brazing alloys used globally. I've spent around 20 years in HR across public and private and third sectors, with a focus on equality and diversity and employment law. But all of that pales into insignificance the last week, as I have been a vanguard business for the Keep Britain Working Group, and as such, attended the CBI Roundtable event in London and also aired on the BBC Radio 4 Today show. It has been great to see and experience such energy and passion firsthand for the vanguard stage of Sir Charlie's review. Businesses have reached out to hear more about what we are doing at LSN, which gives you and I, Joe, plenty to discuss here today. But before we get stuck in, I just want to emphasise I am not an expert, and LSN have as many areas of weakness as we do areas of strength.
Thanks, Deb, and welcome back. So just to get us started, regarding the Mayfield review, have you seen greater interest from other SMEs as a result of the work that you've been doing with the review team and as a vanguard organisation?
Yes, I definitely have. There has been loads of engagement from other vanguard businesses and some really inspirational examples that I heard last week. What I'm seeing from my interactions with other HR professionals is an awareness that many issues in the UK have converged to create a perfect storm of social factors spilling over into the workplace at an unprecedented rate. And this comes at a time when cost of living has been high, immigration is causing challenges that we're all aware of, unemployment remains high, skills gaps remain prevalent, brain drain of UK grads going abroad is having an impact, and millionaires emigrating from the UK is on the rise. So many HR professionals are really passionate about wanting to make a difference in their workplace, but are simply drowning in a sea of conflicting priorities and also unknown territories, and are therefore losing sight of a clear roadmap to HR excellence. The purpose of the Keep Britain Working Review Vanguard phase is to bring businesses together to share examples of good practice so that they can learn from each other, draw others into the network, and share all of the great knowledge that is out there via a low-cost, easily accessible means. So this will also provide combined macro UK data from the UK Workplace Health Intelligence Unit that will be set up, which will expedite the pace of learning. So it basically bears similarity to the way that AI allows learning to be scaled. The aim of the Keep Britain Working Task Force is to try and scale up good people practices and good people management across the UK.
I mean, just as you're talking there, Deb, there is so much going on at the moment. It's a really exciting time. And it's also been pretty busy with comments from podcast one. If we were to try and condense your approach at LSN into 3 takeaways, I know this is a big ask, what would you focus on?
Well, in the conversations that I've had with the other SMEs over the last week, I have summarised the work we do at LSN into 3 main areas of focus. So I think firstly, it's managing the grey areas with reasonable kindness first and foremost. Secondly, invest heavily in training and development. We've invested massively in training over the last 3.5 years, and we've really reaped the rewards from doing that. And then the third thing, which I think is important, is creating a sense of belonging in your workplace.
I think there's three really good priorities there, and probably enough for another couple of podcasts just from those three. And for anyone who missed our first podcast, we walked through how LSN made some of the principles that Deb's talked about work in practice. And I think it's a great practical case study and well worth catching after this. And we'll link to that in the show notes. But to sort of move on a bit and I suppose move us towards the forthcoming legislation, let's get stuck into the big one, sickness. So can you talk a little bit about sick pay, statutory sick pay? What's on the agenda for you at LSN?
So we already leaned into early contact and supportive return to work meetings, and that worked well for us in absence management and retention. If waiting days go, then we'll build that cost awareness into our absence conversations and the training that we do, and we'll obviously have to budget for that shift. But the big picture is that that's just one of several headwinds affecting us. Tariffs are affecting our business. National insurance brought an increase of 50,000 a year to our wage bill. National minimum wage doesn't affect us directly as we pay above the living wage, but it affects wage expectations indirectly. Inflation and utility costs have been astronomical for our sector. So we'll continue to plan cash flow and keep focusing on good work design to reduce absence in the first place. But the fact is, if these costs keep rising, businesses such as ours become less competitive in that global market. So having honest, frank, open conversations right from the first interview and then reinforced in the induction and in every sickness, disciplinary performance meeting thereafter to highlight all of that and be upfront about it. I think that really asserts the standards that you are prepared to accept as a business and the standards that you are not. And, I believe that good communication is key to this. That is the linchpin of your sickness policy.
I think that's one of the things, one of my reflections is that organizations like yourself, organizations trying to do the right thing, they'll be thinking about this already and putting plans in place. And that probably helps to mitigate some of the impacts from the changes in legislation, and people being able to access sick pay is not necessarily a bad thing. But on terms of the practicalities, what two habits or practical steps have kept your absence controlled that you'd recommend to other SMEs before any legal switch flips?
Yeah, I think, like you said, Joe, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And we've got a very generous sickness policy. We've kept that. A lot of businesses have chosen to negotiate that right down, but we've kept a generous sickness policy, but we just make sure that we're the careful gatekeepers of it. Yeah, so some of the things that we've done and that I would advise would be constantly reinforcing the savings from managing absence fairly, and then make sure that some of that cost saving is going back to the workforce, be it training and development, salaries above market rates, bonuses, etc. You need to be making sure that you communicate that to the workforce. Also, be clear in communicating that allowing sickness issues to drift is not kind. It's the opposite. In my view, even if an employee is getting paid, to allow the sickness issues to drift is unkind. If an employee is not a good fit for your business and they are struggling to maintain good attendance, then it needs to be dealt with. It's not kind to let that drift. And if someone is off on long-term sick due to mental ill health, for example, then the research has clearly shown that long periods away from work and social interaction and a sense of accomplishment is not necessarily good for their rehabilitation. So again, I think allowing things to be dealt with in a timely manner and making sure that things don't drift is really important. Allowing sickness to drift is unkind and it will stray into unfair processes.
I think you're absolutely right there. Being kind doesn't mean not dealing with issues as they come up. It's so important to be addressing things, identifying problems, and wherever possible, dealing with them informally. And I think from my experience, the longer someone's away from work, the harder it is to come back.
Yeah.
So all of those things that you're talking about there in terms of phased return support is absolutely critical. Let's sort of move away a little bit from that area, look at another big one from the bill, from the Act, day one protection from unfair dismissal. With probation still allowed, what's your lens as an SME where the learning curve can be 12 to 18 months on safety critical work, I think?
Well, we support fair work and clarity. but we need probationers that fit the job, not the calendar in all reality. So in manufacturing, roles are very often safety critical. And in our particular field of work, we produce rare alloys. Sometimes these products might not come back around for 12 months or longer. However, when working on these particular products, it really can expose the need for attention to detail. So 6 months is a very short window for us to fully assess a new starter's competence. So they have a competency framework, and the first 6 months is about assessing them to a position of the first part of our manufacturing process. But the competency matrix for the full part of the process takes around 2 years. So practically, we will be rolling out more training on probation reviews and performance assessment. We already have formalized probation reviews, clear standards per role, staged reviews, documented training opportunities, and the option to extend fairly when the learning cycle warrants it. We'll refresh our capability and performance routes also, so that managers don't shoehorn issues into misconduct too soon. So I'm not against the day one rights. We should all be operating to those standards of fairness from day one in any case. But I am averse to admin and bureaucracy, which ultimately adds cost to small businesses and prevents them from operating dynamically in a business context that is very dynamic.
And I think from my perspective, Deb, I was thinking about the fact that SMEs make up such a huge part of the economy. And, we're talking about productivity a lot in the UK, and some of those points you're making around what prevents them from operating dynamically is really important. It sounds like you've got some really good thoughts and ideas about how to make the best of that for your organization. But if I can really pin you down, if there was one Monday morning change you'll make so that day one rights don't spook managers, what would it be?
Well, I've already done this very proactively. I simply reminded them all through recent training. So we rolled out anti-harassment training when the law changed last October. And as part of that and ongoing training, I have reminded them that employees already have day one rights in many ways. So many dismissal claims will be wrapped up in some kind of discrimination or breach of health and safety or breach of contract type issue. Therefore, in many cases, there is already a day one right if you look at it through that lens. We have everything in place and we already deploy good employment practices, so there is nothing for them to be concerned about. It just potentially means a bit more time spent on capturing the audit trail earlier on. Whereas although we are doing it, we might not have bothered to have the lengthy meeting notes and the lengthy disciplinary outcome letters for employees with less than 2 years length of service. Where we could start to see it bite is where there is redundancy situations. But again, with the Equality Act in mind, employers should not be using a last in, first out approach to redundancies either.
That's really helpful, Deb. Thank you. And sort of talking about conflicts, I know that there's sort of major system capacity issues. We know that ACAS is stretched. We've very recently seen the early conciliation period move from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. There's backlogs in tribunals. The Act's longer time limits, could be more claims, even with good intentions. But what practical stances do you think SMEs can take in that new context and that's coming in with the introduction of the bill?
Assume slower conciliation, I would say. Invest in those earlier resolution processes in-house. Never underestimate the importance of talking at an early stage and in equipping managers with the soft skills to have those difficult conversations. Let's face it, most employment tribunal claims stem from a conversation gone wrong at some point. It's as simple as that. And in my sector in particular, I think there is a stubbornness to these types of issues, and that can creep in. So if it's not facilitated immediately, we can see little things start to progress into bigger issues. So that's something that we've been working on with the soft skills for our mid-management team in encouraging people to have those difficult conversations earlier. I myself am an ACAS accredited mediator. I've been doing some mediation work for an external organisation in a completely different sector to manufacturing over the last 3 months. And it always really surprises me just how much simply talking in a meaningful way can help. And also how much easier it is, to be honest, as the impartial mediator than when you're advising as an in-house HR capacity. The external mediation was really successful, and whilst I can't discuss any of the material content here, I found it really uplifting to help those parties. And it also reminded me that every organisation, no matter how large or small, has its own ER challenges. Professor Saundry and ACAS completed seminal research in this area back in 2021, and I was fortunate enough to speak with them at their conference last May in London. And their work concluded that conflict was costing the UK 28.5 billion a year. And I imagine that figure to be even higher now. And in fact, this week I shared their current research on LinkedIn, which stated 1.7 million disciplinary cases and 428,000 dismissals cost UK businesses 12.5 billion a year. So these are huge figures and have a huge impact on our economy, as you said. So good advice is to sharpen up documentation and make reasoned decisions so that if challenged 6 months later, the file tells a fair story. Also, make sure that you retain key data, but that you do so in line with GDPR and do regular data audit checks. So at LSN, we have just completed our very thorough GDPR audit, and we've done that this month. And I would encourage speak up and manager surgeries to catch early sparks. I can't emphasize enough how often little things left to fester can turn into big, expensive things.
I think there's 2 points there, Deb, that could be whole podcasts in their own. Is that
Yeah.
the importance of informal dialogue? I know from my own experience, getting that right can be really transformative. It's hard, but if you can find the right way to deal with an issue before it comes formal, I think it's in everyone's interests. Not always possible. And the second point I was just going to briefly make was 28.5 billion is just such a big number. It's sort of hard to conceptualize that, but I think you've sort of done a really good job there of breaking it down into some of the really practical areas people need to think about. And sort of we've talked before about early resolution, and I know that you took part in the Skilled Managers program with Professor Saundry. Did anything specific from that program catch your eye that you want to share with others?
Yeah, I think, it really brought to the fore the importance of line manager capability and investing in your line managers, your mid-management team. Sometimes we take for granted the fact that many line managers have come up through the ranks and they may have been an excellent engineer or nurse or IT technician, but they may not be a natural people person. So what seems second nature to a people person can feel very alien to others. Combine that with being under pressure to deliver, perhaps being short staffed, perhaps having budget pressures, some of those very much needed soft skills conversations can simply get pushed out, and they can get pushed to the side for weeks or months, or even in extreme cases for years, until it becomes the norm to operate in a way that is just not helpful in getting the best out of your team members. Also, dealing with conflict itself can be very uncomfortable for people. And the Skills for Managers training was perfect for our workforce as it was bite-sized and relatable. And I think it gave people confidence that they are on the right track, but just perhaps need to brush up on a few areas. And the interactive training highlighted to them that they are definitely not alone in dealing with these issues that they face. The mid-management team have really evolved with their soft skills over the last 3 years, and they now collaborate much better. They deal with low-level discontent more swiftly, and we've seen this reflected. So we've had much lower level disciplinary. So we've still had some disciplinaries in the last 3 years, but they seem to be of a much lower level issue now. And we've had no formal grievances for over 2 years. All of our staff earn above market rates for their roles, and they are on track to have another increase from January, which is individually performance related. And again, I think all of this investment in people's soft skills and building their confidence and their capability is giving rise to them adding more value. And that in turn feeds into the rewards that they get. We've had many internal promotions since we did the Skills for Managers training 2 years ago. And as part of that journey to professionalise, we've also brought in several new professional roles to bolster our in-house expertise. So we have several employees doing masters. We've got a PhD student and soon to be a second PhD student. We have 2 doctors that already work for us. Almost all of our mid-management team have now also done external professional qualifications at level 3, 5 or 7. So for a little factory out in the sticks, we have some pretty capable people working very hard to keep the business pushing forward.
There's a lot of great work happening there, Deb, and I think you're doing yourself a disservice there. And I think the other point I would pick up on is being a manager is hard. I remember when I started and it was tough. And if there's anyone watching who I sort of used to support, I used to do this thing where I take my watch off and put it on the table. And one of the team had to actually say to me that made us feel like we were on a timetable. And I took that on board and improved, but it wasn't an easy journey. And I completely empathize with people who are starting that out, because if someone doesn't tell you what to do and how to do it, it's really hard.
I was just going to think you're absolutely right there, Joe. With the pace of life at the moment, people are always conscious of the time, and people have multiple disruptions now, don't they? Whether it's from their smartwatch or their phone or the multiple apps that they've got open on their laptop. So, the equivalent of you having your watch there, people are glancing at their smartwatch, and these little cues really do disengage people.
It's a really, really important point, and that's a lesson that I had to learn myself. And I didn't even have a smartwatch then, so I managed to make my own distractions. But that is a perfect segue and leads me very nicely, actually, into the next part I wanted to ask you about, which was around well-being. Can you talk a little bit about what's on your agenda from that perspective at LSN?
Yeah, so I would say well-being is fairly high on our agenda, but there is always more that can be done. So I've mentioned previously that we've done loads of fitness socials. We have an LSN rugby team. We have sponsored local sports teams and events, and we have raised funds for charity. Our MD is very pro agile working, and he is big on promoting reflection. So he actually insisted that our ops director only works 4 days a week, so he can take 1 day a week to reflect and have a fresh mind to face the challenges for the week ahead. And I myself have always had the flexibility for childcare and school runs. We take the view that if someone's job lends itself to flexible working and home working and fits with the needs of the business, then why not? But this has taken cultural maturity. The elephant in the room being that some roles simply necessitate a physical presence. But I honestly think we should be doing more to promote proactive health management, such as nutrition advice, healthy lifestyle advice, the importance of sleep, and being able to rebalance. And I have to say that my pet hate is seeing people surviving on those energy drinks that are now so popular. So I think there's plenty more that can be done. One area I think we are good at is creating a sense of belonging at work, allowing people to be their self. So LSN is absolutely brimming with quirky characters. And right from when I first joined, I was impressed about the honesty of people's uniquely different characteristics. Again, a strength that an SME can really play to because you're small enough to really know your people. We don't have a culture of micromanagement, so employees can kind of get their work done in their own way. And research has shown that that's important. Autonomy of role goes a long way to creating job satisfaction. And in fact, I was chatting to a new starter just Wednesday of this week, and he said he absolutely loves it. He said he has never found a job that has suited him so well in the past. He loves that he can come to work, get stuck into a busy job. Everyone has been really supportive, and he literally can't believe his luck. And that's what we want to hold on to. People with that mindset will go far. Interestingly, we have seen an increase in neurodivergent conditions in our younger workforce, and that is in sync with national trends. And we've just put 4 managers through government neurodiversity training this quarter. And in fact, in certain areas of our work, neurodivergent colleagues tend to do well because it's an environment where they can switch off from people and just get lost in the job. And we have also seen a rise in musculoskeletal issues. And interestingly, I think this could just be my perception, but I think perhaps my age group and upwards are starting to feel the brunt of this if they have been a desk worker for decades. At LSN, we have encouraged employees to go to the gym next door to our building, go for lunchtime walks. And I personally try and get out as much as I can walking just to offset the fact that I have a desk job. Yeah, so I think we do quite a bit. It is high on our agenda, but there's always more that can be done.
We've got to try to find a way to do a podcast on the walk so that we're not sitting at our desks. So I completely agree with you about being desk bound. I'm not a fan of energy drinks, although I am a fan of coffee. So maybe
Yes,
there's a
me
whole
too.
nother way to do this as part of that. But that sort of brings us to the end of what we wanted to cover off today. So that's a wrap in terms of our HR issues for SMEs. Deb, thank you again. Your lens on this keeps things practical, but considering the passage of the legislation, not political. So thank you for agreeing to come along and share your experience. We'll be
You're
looking at
welcome.
other areas of interest. And with our next podcast, maybe we do one on the move, and we'll be building on what we've talked about so far. We've had the Keeping Britain Working review. There's also potentially more reports and insight coming down the track that will inform what we're talking about. You can find Deb on LinkedIn, and you can also reach me on LinkedIn, Substack, and through other channels, which will include in the notes page. And you can also find out more about the Skilled Managers Programme and the work that Professor Saundry has been doing, which, to give them a plug, is some really fantastic practical work that helps organisations, especially SMEs. So lastly, hit subscribe to get the latest podcasts and newsletters as they come out. And thank you for listening to Across the Table. Looking forward to continuing these practical conversations, helping to build trust, resolve issues, and ultimately improve the experience of work. So thank you very much.